to our first panel, which deals directly with the situation that we're talking about. But before I do that, just as precursor to let you know that tomorrow will be the last day of the conference, and we are purposely leaving 2 hours at the end of the conference for all the audience to participate. We really, truly want your input, your suggestions, your comments, your constructive criticisms, anything that took place during these 3 days of the conference. We need to hear from you. We want it to be interactive. Many of our panelists will be present to ask questions and answer questions because we're not doing Q&A during the conference itself. So we really want people to participate tomorrow evening. So that said, I'm going to call upon our first panelist. The title is what I just mentioned: medical neglect, elder abuse, malpractice of our elders in these prisons. We've lost many, far too many of our elders in these dungeons in this country. Baba Zay mentioned a few of them: Albert Noah Washington, Abdul Majid, Bashir Hamid, yes, sir. Kwesi Balagoon. It goes on and on. Veterans of the original Black Panther and veterans of the Black Liberation Army, many of them. Needlessly, they died behind those walls. Then we have those who were released, who died shortly after being released because of those conditions. We just lost, as Baba Zaid mentioned, Sekou Odinga. We lost Russell Malone Schultz shortly after he was released. Chucky in Durban, Africa. Yes, Chucky in Durban, Africa. Thank you, Brother Tariq. And Wallace. That's Wallace. What was it? Not even a week before Herman Wallace, we lost him, due to those medical neglect in the prisons. And they're all suffering right now, be it poor eyesight, hypertension, cancer. Baba Kamau has been dealing with issues on, and those who don't know, Baba Mumia is currently going under some serious medical difficulties right now, which you're going to hear about that from this panel. So without any further ado, because we are almost on time, we started a little late, but I'm going to call upon our speakers, Ricardo Alvarez. Could you just introduce yourself, Dr. Alvarez?
Yes. So first, my name is Ricardo Alvarez. I'm a physician and I am a medical consultant to Mumia Abu-Jamal and also engage in medical consultations here in California. And I just want to acknowledge the release of Sitawa, who it's just so powerful. This is just 3 days ago. So we're grateful for his release here in California.
Thank you, Doc. We want to bring Dr. James McIntosh.
I just contacted him. He'll be on. If we can maybe go to Laura, I think he'll be on shortly.
Can't see anything.
Shep, you're muted, so we can't hear if you're instructing us to do something.
Okay.
I think you're good. Okay. You good now?
1, 2, 1, 2.
Yeah, we can hear you.
You can hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. All right, let's start again. I don't know when that happened, but Dr. McIntosh, could you just introduce yourself, please? Thank you.
Greetings, brothers and sisters. My name is Dr. James McIntosh. I'm a retired psychiatrist and a co-chair of a couple of organizations, CEMOTAP and the Board for the Education of People of African Ancestry.
Thank you. Laura Whitehorn.
Good morning. I'm Laura Whitehorn. I am a former anti-imperialist political prisoner, and I am part of probably most of the organizations to free political prisoners mentioned here, and also one of the co-founders with a number of people whom I'll talk about later, of Release Aging People in Prison. And I'm honored to be part of this conference.
Thank you, Laura. Just so folks will know, the original moderator we had scheduled for this evening had a situation, so I'm filling in. And I'm not a medical practitioner, but I am a revolutionary, and I understand the situation that our comrades are suffering behind these walls. So I'm going to open up the first question, which would be basically to give for each panelist to give their take on medical neglect. What is medical neglect and how does it affect our freedom fighters? I'm going to call on Dr. McIntosh first.
Okay, well, medical neglect, it's when you don't administer the treatments or make the recommendations or do any other medical action that you're supposed to take in a given situation. It can be, not as I said before, not administering the proper medication, not hospitalizing somebody when they're supposed to be hospitalized, and not reporting something that is reportable. And I think Ricardo will address that. All of those things could be medical neglect. It's basically just not doing what you're supposed to do as a person who's taken a pledge to, one, do no harm, and also to alleviate suffering to the extent that you can.
Okay. Dr. Alvarez?
Yeah, I just want to ground myself in gratitude, but also ground myself in gratitude with the panelists I'm on with. Both Dr. McIntosh and Laura, I see are teachers, and everything we're saying now, I feel, is built on just such tremendous, just this love that's coming out of people who have been released from prison. Their voices really are guiding and teaching me. And I want to say that when I come and speak about medical neglect, I mean, I can talk about it from a place of its actual, definitions and the ways in which it can occur because there was a neglect in the case of Mumia Abu-Jamal, just as one example where there was a very high blood glucose, and then he was being administered steroids and it put him in diabetic coma. Now, that's an example of medical neglect, right, institutionally. And I want to say that there's an element of that is the human element, that is, the systems occur and someone forgets something. But I also want to identify something that is a kind of neglect that borders on institutional elder abuse, which is the decision by the Pennsylvania Department of Corrections to say that our criteria for treating hepatitis C will now be that you have to have such end stage. Don't come to us until you have esophageal varices, that the liver is so destroyed that the vasculature in your esophagus is now compromised. They use that criteria knowing that these are life-saving medications that when administered at the proper time and in violations of what would be the proper standards, even public health principles of engaging our armamentarium at a time where we can prevent damage down the stream, That's a kind of medical neglect that is also institutional elder abuse that is systemic. And they do it rooted in their own definition of power to say, we will make now these standards. And this is the love of Mama Pam bringing everybody together to say, wait, this is wrong. And connecting with a larger community and organizing. So those are two examples of like medical neglect, and it could occur from the place of the individual, and medical neglect that is actually institutional elder abuse that's related to institutional power.
Thank you. Laura?
Yeah, so agree with everything that Dr. McIntosh and Alvarez have said. I do have to start by saying, if we're going to talk about any kind of medical abuse, we have to look at what the Israelis are doing to Palestine, and especially in Gaza and Rafah. I won't go on about that because I'm hoping that everyone here at this gathering is also running around to every protest that we can get to target and push states, and also understands that this is not a war between Israel and Hamas, it's a war by Israel and Palestine. So the reason I bring that in is not only because how can you talk in this period and not be aware of that and talk about it in this, context, but also because, I don't know, having done release aging people in prison, took the issue of elder abuse as the beginning point of opening up abolition of the prison system, in very specifically in New York State, but also nationally, by saying that what constitutes elder abuse actually is incarceration, and that the prison system in the United States follows in the heels of the counterintelligence program in trying to destroy Black and brown communities as a whole, because that is where revolutionaries come from. And that is a lesson that I learned first from God, now see, old people, from Chokwe Lumumba, who talked about that, about how mass incarceration is a continuation of COINTELPRO. In New York State, what we did was because RAP began with the wisdom of Eddie Ellis of Black Panther, rest in peace, another past hero, and Sophia Elijah, who's has been a lawyer to many political prisoners, including most recently Sundiata Acoli, and Mujahid Farid, who served 33 years in prison on a 15 to life sentence, and Kathy Boudin, and Lumumba Bandeli and Monifa Bandeli, who had worked on the cases of the New York State political prisoners for so many years. And we understood that the political prisoners in New York State were part of a population that was aging and dying in prison, because the prisons are meant to do that. So we tried to harness, and I can talk about this more specifically, the issues of medical neglect and elder abuse, in fact, with the issues of releasing people with no exclusions, focusing on people convicted of violent, what are called crimes by the United States, after many years in prison. So just, that's kind of a broad. I also just want to say, Safia Bukhari, also, even though she had been out of prison for a lot of years before she died, we know she was basically another one whose name we should call, because she was not only a victim of medical neglect while she was in prison. Remember, she had to escape to try to get attention, to get medical care, but also from the struggle against this insanely vicious system of genocide to free her comrades.
Can't hear you. You're muted, Brother Shep. Still muted. You're muted on the Zoom, not on your mic, on the Zoom. The little, right.
You can hear me now.
Yes, yes, sir.
What it is, we get the echo. Go ahead.
Okay, I wanted to say something because, you know, my fellow panelists you know, really made me ask a question. You know, the way I answered the question, I thought was from a legal standpoint. What I got from what they were saying is that, and you know, I think from a legal standpoint, I'm not a lawyer, but you mentioned, Laura mentioned Chokwe Lumumba. Like, there's neglect, there's malpractice, and then there's abuse. And those are like 3 levels. You know, neglect can be inadvertent. Neglect can be, well, I mean, it's not really inadvertent. Neglect is when you don't do something you're supposed to do. Malpractice is when you don't do something you're really obligated to do, that it's you know, it's basically almost criminal. And then abuse is criminal. You know, abuse is when you do something, as has been pointed out, deliberately to cause harm, pain, or suffering of your you know, of your patients. And I think in the case of that we're talking about in with our political prisoners, is that, and really in prisoners in general, that we're at the highest level. It's actually abuse, and that's what I thought Ricardo would mention, as he said before. What, you know, keeping somebody who's 80 something years old, no harm, no threat, not giving them parole, is you know, this is beyond neglect. You know, somebody that is suffering from late stage cancer and you keep them incarcerated, it's beyond neglect. It's you know, and beyond malpractice, and the physicians not recommending release, or not, you know, making the proper recommendations, that's also criminal.
If I can just jump in, Shep, for a second, to really agree with that, and to say that one of the things we found when we started reaching out to practitioners through RAP, we worked with people who were working on compassionate release. And this woman did a study of compassionate release statutes across the United States, in every state system and the feds. In every one, who gets to make the decision? You're dying. You go to a panel to see if you can be released. Who's on that panel? The prosecutor, the parole board. So it's like if we went to the doctor, you know, I've had cancer. If I went to my doctor, and instead of her telling me when I could have surgery, I had to go before, you know, the head of the NYPD. So this, I totally agree with you. And I think it's institutionalized in such a way that this demands a massive struggle to end the prison system as it is altogether.
Shep, I'm sorry to talk so much, but Laura reminded me of something else. When you said the thing about Hamas and Israel, see, there's another level beyond that. There's a level beyond abuse. You're talking about war crimes. You know, when you bomb a hospital, you know, it's a war crime. When you try to commit genocide, it's a war crime. That's different. That's an even worse level.
I feel like this is almost like a poetic riff with my colleagues, because I just want to share that as we speak, Sitawa, in my consultation with him, you know, once I have permission, I'm really, from my ethical responsibilities, if I am speaking to him as a physician, I'm saying, I'm identifying you as a political prisoner who's a victim of torture, recognizing that this conversation is being taped by the state. And in this relationship, I understand you to be in direct harm, and you meet functional criteria for release by the compassionate release law as legislated by Phil Tank, And then that's getting taped by Minister King X. And we have that, you know, this is how that conversation goes. And that law specifically states, and this was through advocacy. This is why I say that everything we're saying is not like it came out of and you know, Laura, you know, your instructions, your teaching on this. Understand, this is coming out of decades of advocacy around releasing our elders from elder abuse. That legislation for compassionate release is rooted in the medical provider's decision. So when I'm having that conversation, I'm literally saying, and at this point, this is rooted in a medical provider's decision for compassionate release, which is related to criteria of functional capacity, and then he's now released. So that in California is now an opportunity for us to advocate as a specific strategy here. Now, I also want to share with you that there are internal tensions that exist within the prison industrial slave complex. And this is a huge opportunity in Pennsylvania, because just a couple of months ago, you have the former directors, the secretaries of the Department of Corrections, that's Wetzel and Little. The last two directors have a 30-page amicus brief that came out for a death by incarceration case that's going to the Supreme Court, the Derek Lee case, through the Abolitionist Law Center, and it reads like a handbook for us. They're literally saying, I'm reading it as I speak, life without parole sentences for felony murders are financially insensible. Lifers cost by far the most to incarcerate of anyone in the prison population. Spending does not commensurately increase public safety because many or even most lifers could be released without incident to their communities. Forcing correctional systems to expend finite resources to incarcerate people unnecessarily prevents correctional systems from reinvesting in people who need and could benefit from rehabilitation. Increasing parole eligibility would not threaten public safety because Pennsylvania's parole system already contains robust safeguards. Now, I'm reading their testimony. So I need us to understand that if we come together across disciplines and professions, that is our responsibility, because I need you to understand my sense is that police officers should be our colleagues. Correctional officers should be our colleagues. If they are invested with the authority, the monopoly on state violence in relationship to public safety, we should be working together. So there's rich opportunity, and I'll talk a little bit later around Pennsylvania specific actions, especially as it relates to the interfaith community that exist right now from a place of advocacy. So Mumia has always instructed us, everything related to his case should relate to all our political prisoners, should relate to all our elders, to release them as the spear point to now get their consultation in freedom to help guide us in releasing all of our prisoners.
Okay, can y'all hear me? Still
Yes, sir.
echo? How about now? Still a
Not
little
too
bit.
bad.
All right, I'm gonna push through this and we'll work on this.
You probably have, it sounds like you have two sources of sound. Maybe something coming out of a speaker, or maybe you have a second microphone, a second computer in the room.
Yeah, that's not.
Yeah, I'll just take a guy here.
Go ahead, keep talking.
Okay, Dr. Mack,
Yes, sir.
I remember you did a piece dealing with cancer in the prison and how the prison authorities were killing our prisoners. Could you elaborate a little bit on that?
Okay, well, I think that until about 2007, smoking was permitted and actually almost required if you were in prison because of the levels of stress that you were putting people through. So when you're talking about cancers, we know that stress is one of the things that causes or is a contributor. We know that cigarette smoke is a contributor. We had the situation at Marion where the water was contaminated. And we know that toxins in the water are cancer producing. We have radiation being used right at the jail level, not even the prison level, radiation, which is a contributor or a factor that can influence whether or not people get cancer. We know that the food has been described by various organizations as, toxic, and it's not just cancer. That basically the diets that the people have also predispose you to things like strokes and heart attacks and heart failure. The lack of exercise. We know that the lack of sunlight, is something that can contribute to cancer and many other conditions. And when you have a prison designed where the warden tells you it's designed so that the prisoners will never be able to see the sun, there's a problem. Because you need a certain amount, and what they do is they give them 1 hour. I said a week, and Brother Sekou told me, he said, if you would get out there 3 times a week, you would be lucky. And even that was in a caged situation without direct sunlight, so you got to have an hour or 2 of direct sunlight every day to avoid the things that are caused by deficiencies of vitamin D. So those are some of the things, not to go on too long. The other thing is the constellation of symptoms, the constellations of disease among the political prisoners. In other words, if you take a picture of the whole group and see how frequently cancer is a problem, see how frequently preventable disease is a problem, all of that comes together. It's not just one thing. It's not just cancer. It's not just heart attacks. It's not just hypertension. It's not just diabetes. You look at that pattern of disease and you're dealing with a very sick population when you talk about our political prisoners. There's no reason why people who were into health, they were into eating healthy, they were into exercise, all of those things mitigate cancer. Okay, they mitigate serious disease. And then you get 4 members of out of 9 coming down with cancer. You get 2 people that were in the same prison getting a rare cancer, such as Jamil Alameen and Mutulu Shakur, both coming down with a cancer that has a 0.8 of 1% chance of occurring in a person's lifetime. Not within a couple of years, like with them, not in the same place. That would make it much more unlikely to happen. 2, those are things that make you see the prisons as carcinogenic and I guess you would say diseasogenic. You know what I mean? They precipitate illnesses of the physical kind and also of the mental kind. It's the mental stress. You had not to go on too long, but there were 2 experiments that, there were more experiments than that, but 2, I guess it was I'm trying to think. One was certainly the Stanford prison experiment. The other one was the Millman experiment. I believe it's Millman, MILL something. And in one, they had people do the roles. In Stanford, they had them play the roles, average people playing the role of prisoner and guard. And within a few days, you saw the abusive patterns that take place in prison develop with these people who were supposed to be in an experiment. And by like day 15 or so, you had one person actually having a mental breakdown as a result of that. So you imagine a person that's in jail for 50 years, that's in prison for 50 years. It's very, very different. Okay. And then in the other experiment, they had ordinary citizens administer what they thought were doses of electricity to people, shocks, electric shocks for violations. And you found that not only sadistic people that we know are sadistic and have illnesses that predicate towards sadism, but average people put in those roles by a system are willing to administer pain or torture or hurt people. So you can imagine that when that happens in an experiment that goes on for a couple of weeks, what happens with people that serve in that capacity for decades, for their career, for their lifetime? You saw in Attica what happened. You just so, I mean, without going, y'all all know what happened there. I mean, cancer is just one thing. Cancer is one thing. all kinds of illnesses and all types of mental illnesses can be precipitated by incarceration, mass incarceration, lengthy incarceration, as occurs to our political prisoners. You're muted again, Brother Shap.
Laura?
Yeah, I just want to add, thank you so much for that, Dr. McIntosh. That was brought back a lot of facts and history. Just a couple of other things, as a matter of general operating in New York State, it took a huge struggle to pass a law that women giving birth could not be shackled to the bed. This is all over the country. Women giving birth were in shackles. And that doesn't even include what I saw in federal prison, which is where a woman's 9 months pregnant, she's starting to have labor pains. They're taking her out to the hospital and she's in fucking belly chains and leg shackles. And then comes back 24 hours after giving birth, because that's how long you were allowed to stay with the baby. And if someone didn't pick up that child in 24 hours, it went right to foster care. So talk about forms of genocide. I believe I've written about this, and so Sekou and Dekwi wrote a similar article we both did at the same time about how the conditions of incarceration in the United States, and since we know that it's overwhelmingly for Black and brown people, because that's who gets targeted, or constitute a form of genocide. In other words, trying to destroy all or part of a population. I wanted to mention that. I wanted to say also in New York State, we have it on it's a resource on the RAP website, which is rapcampaign.com. There's a resource tab, and it has so many years of reports, one of which shows that since New York State outlawed the death penalty, more people have died in prison than died in all the years when the death penalty was in practice. The average age of death in the New York State system is between 57 and 58 years of age, and someone dies every 3 days. So just for a second, I want to talk about how we have been able to use this understanding. Oh, one other thing, in case we ever forget, it's the struggles of the people inside who make the changes. So for example, Hep C. And I thought one of the really outstanding things that happened in the campaign to free Mumia Abu-Jamal was that when he needed Hep C treatment, his demand was put in the context of the need of the fact that Pennsylvania was actually violating laws that had been passed in the community, saying that anyone, but I can't remember, and Dr. Alvarez, you probably remember exactly what the thing was. It was Billy Rubin or something. You got hepatitis C treatment. You did not have to go into cirrhosis in order to get it. And that was instituted because of that. That was instituted in New York because of the struggles actually led by people with HIV and Hep C, California. So I want to talk for a second about organizing and all this information, which is really available. And this is, I'm listening to the two of you. I do this stuff. This is what I do every day, and I'm learning from the two of you, is that this also tells us how to strengthen our movements to free political prisoners. And one thing is, and this was something, talking about gratitude, which this weekend is really, reminding us all to feel every second. When Sekou was ill, I was fortunate to be one of the people on his care team who stayed with him, different hours, all hours of the day and night. And he talked to me a lot about the role that Mujahid Farid, who I mentioned before, who started RAP with me and Sophia and Kathy. And by the way, of the three of us formerly incarcerated people in that team, all three of us have developed cancer. I'm the lucky one. Mine have both been able to be removed, but Kathy died after a heroic fight of uterine cancer last year, and ovarian cancer, sorry, and Fareed died of an esophageal and other form of cancer that I can't remember, I'm sorry. And Fareed, because of our connections with a correctional institute, not a correctional state institution, or an advocacy institution, was able to get Sekou and others, Val, who I see on this screen, and me and other people, the ability to meet to start the Northeast Political Prisoner Coalition. And even though Fareed was not active in that coalition, he would go and help. And Sekou used to tell me all the time, over and over again when we were together, how much he appreciated that. And that was gratitude. And Fareed was one who struggled against having separate organizing for political prisoners and against the prison system as a whole. And I always fell between that, because obviously it's really important to support and fight for political prisoners. If we don't, then we're not fighting for the revolutionary movements that we all came from, and from the fact that our cases were part of exposing that the United States is a white settler colony, an imperialist nation, and that there needs to be revolution led by third world people inside the United States and around the world. If we neglect political prisoners, it also then tells younger people, don't take any risks, because there won't be a movement there to support you. So it's totally important. But what Fareed kept emphasizing was that it's one system that destroys both, quote, social prisoners or whatever, and political prisoners. And so that's how we developed RAP. The way that we have been able to accrue support for these issues, we have a coalition now in New York State that includes like 350 local organizations around the country, is by reaching out to medical, public health groups, having people write about how life in prison and the denial of parole for people convicted of things like crimes against police is a form of public health emergency. And I think that we can all do that in different states, because there are Dr. Alvarez can talk about it. The American Public Health Association issued a statement a couple of years ago saying that mass incarceration is a form of medical abuse, right? Or that abolition is the only cure for the medical abuse that affects people in prison. That for Mumia, release is what would a doctor prescribe? Release from prison. So, but those things, we have a lot of allies in this country who are like doctors and nurses. Barbara Zeller, who's a major medical support for all the political prisoners. When I first knew her back in the 70s, before I knew her, she was volunteering, in an emergency room, and saw the conditions of the medical conditions for communities of color. So all of those people are allies, and people who do work around seniors. We're in New York State. It's taken us years, but RAP was just awarded the State Society on Aging of New York Advocate of the Year Award for working with incarcerated people. We can make these inroads. And I think that, hopefully out of this weekend, more of that will be happening, because within the prisons, anyone who's been in prison or works with formerly incarcerated people, the one place where people in the United States understand that there are political prisoners is inside the prisons, because people are both politicized and also have been in prison with political prisoners. So we have power to do this work.
Dr. Alvarez.
So first, I want to begin by stating that we should acknowledge that prisons have been historically and continue to be a place that is not designed for rehabilitation, but is designed as a place of social control. Therefore, we can look back at the historical record and we can see that experimentation occurs and has historically occurred in prisons. We can look back and recognize that products that are used now for retin A, for acne, products that are used for pesticides, were experimented by medical practitioners going into prison without proper standards of informed consent. Also understand that, you know, I'm just a community health center doc, but I do recognize that within the Puerto Rican community, we felt that Don Pedro Albizu Campos, that was the torture that is standard practice. 30 years of solitary confinement does not need a medical degree, does not need a historical degree to understand that's torture. When Dr. McIntosh talks about nature, we have now studies that show literally our brain waves are in a healing pattern when we're in relation to the ocean and the trees. Mumia speaks to us of the assault on his humanity, a second by second assault on humanity. And Mumia is one of the gifts he teaches, is he teaches me just how important it is for him, just the dew on the grass, the smell of grass, how much he energetically draws from it to give him sustenance and life, connecting him with his ancestors. This journey is a spiritual journey of survival in a setting that is designed to degrade the human spirit. He speaks of it literally as being in the belly of the beast. Now, when we understand that context, if we are professionals with an ethical responsibility to address it, to be trauma informed, the first thing we have to do is to say it. And this is what Mama Pam said. She said, what is your medical assessment? Then say it. We should be saying it at every professional conference. And this is what Jaleel was like, use their language is what he's saying. So I know Dr. McIntosh, we're involved in that project where we're looking at the charter of the Fraternal Order of Police. We're identifying them as the social determinant of health. This is the language that's coming out of the Public Health Association. And what they said was police violence is a public health crisis. Mass incarceration, the abolition is public health. So when we understand this context and this is what I love about, Laura's going to orient us to how do we move forward and organize. And within the Mumia Coalition, we're examining huge opportunities that are existing in Pennsylvania. One with Wetzel and Little's legal brief, the amicus brief, which is literally like, a teaching ground for us as organizers. This is the law. And this is why I have to say, we in the medical community are supporting Mumia are instructed to be in great alignment with the legal team, understanding that, well, we work in the court of public opinions, and this is, Laura, something that you teach me as well. It's a lot harder when you're dealing with the nitty gritty of parole systems and laws, that narrow, restricted court that is already hostile and illegitimate, that has been hostile, that's much harder. But even within those courts, to have this amicus brief is very powerful. And it's occurring at the time within Pennsylvania, literally right now, February 20th, in 3 days, they have an open, they have a public opening to receive comment on the master plan on older adults. And what is that master plan? This broad, multidisciplinary plan to address what they call a part of their core tenets, which include diversity, equity, inclusion embedded in all phases of development, addressing disparities and promoting equity and inclusion, regardless of age, gender, sexual orientation, race, color, religion. And this is the fascinating thing: veteran status, socioeconomic, genetic, and other differences not yet identified. And this, Brother Shep, is what I was talking about, where we can now, in this master plan, come before them and say, you didn't identify elders in prison. This is a huge opportunity. Now, I've written to the governor, I've written to the Secretary of Health, I've written to the Secretary of the Pennsylvania Department of Correction, I've written to their medical director, I've written to Superintendent Mason, and this is the next stage of our development. When we and this is why, you know, the Pastor, I would love to connect with the religious community, to connect with all of the organizers, all of the people within abolition, to sit at the table with the Department of Aging and address their master plan from a place of harms done. This is institutional elder abuse. There is compelling evidence that you have no basis for keeping them in there. And then when we begin about bringing them home, we bring them home in a place where all of the elements of healing, nature, and love and touch become a place where we can receive their counsel. Now, I also want to share with you, and I'm so grateful for this time. Joka, Heshima, Jinsei here in California, and Abdul Olubala Shakur have written an extremely important document that is an indictment of the prison industrial slave complex in California. That indictment is a RICO indictment. Now, I was just on the phone with him about a couple of days ago with the release of Satawa. That indictment is powerful. We have permission now. It's on a PDF document. This is an indictment that we can now share with our colleagues, our professional organizations. It is such a powerful indictment that it allows us now to say, from again, the voices within the prisons already teaching us, we can now say, this is an understanding that is emerging from within prison that is clearly documenting the abuses that are occurring, understanding it from a perspective of institutional abuses. Thank you for that time to share that.
Thank you. Okay. Still? All right, that's good. Y'all can hear me good now, right?
Yes, sir.
All right, we're figuring out a way to juggle with this because we are recording. Okay, my next question for all the panelists is dealing with when our people come home. What happens when they come home? What can be done? I mean, we all know there's no 401ks, there's no pension plans, and for most of them, there's no medical support at all. So what can be done and what should be done in that area? Dr. Mack?
Well, I think a few things. One, I think most people that are political prisoners are coming out of an organization. All right. And I think that, your family and your organization have, really a great responsibility to try to ease your return into, the society. I think that even before people get out, that there should be, some funds that would be available. Because, you take people, what's the main thing they need? They're going to need food, shelter, clothing. Those things can be done. There are organizations such as the Fortune Society, where I worked for a few years as the medical director at their Better Living Center, where, people can be given employment assistance, they can be given educational assistance, they can be given, different types of assistance that should be done. I think that if all of our organizations that are struggling to liberate our people, to advance our people, to improve conditions, to make drastic change, either quickly or slowly, evolutionary or revolutionary, that all of those people should be willing to kind of do fundraisers, things like that, or at least participate in fundraisers. I think that ideally the person's organization would organize those type things, and then everybody else would participate, would would step in. So I think those are the kinds of things that could happen. And of course, medical care, again, there are, that whatever type of care is needed, there should be a group of the same group of practitioners that are struggling to, end mass incarceration, that sort of thing, and to end the abuse of our elders and political prisoners, that they would, could provide services for both the people and their families. Certainly, as I said before, those are some of the things that could be done as I see it. What happened?
Laura?
Yeah, I think that all of that makes a lot of sense. I mean, when Kathy Boudin got out of prison, she and other formerly incarcerated people got together with some doctors. They started something called the Coming Home program, still exists, which is for medical care specifically for incarcerated people. Because, you get finally an appointment with some doctor or something, and they ask you questions that are immediately, you have to say, well, I was in prison for the last 20 years. And that can be, we know the prejudices in the medical community. So it's really important to have medical people who are particularly and understand all the kinds of things that Dr. Alvarez was saying before about the lack of, Marilyn Buck, my co-defendant, who two of my co-defendants died of really, really terrible cancers. One was Marilyn Buck, who died a few days after her release. The other was Alan Berkman, who was a doctor himself and had been a public health doctor, and developed Hodgkin's disease and then non-Hodgkin's. But anyway, he actually was the subject of a 60-minute, remember 60 Minutes? We used to think it was like exposing things. They did a report on the horrible level of medical care in the federal prison system and interviewed him. He only lived through the experience because he was a doctor, because there were so many mistakes made because they just didn't give a shit. And he always used to say there is no such thing as healthcare in prison, medical care, because security always trumps health. And I think that's another reason, back to the beginning, why abolition is the answer. There's in New York State, and we work with the Fortune Society. We just got a letter of reasonable assurance from them for Kamau Sadiki. We need those things. You need those things when you go through the process of either compassionate release or parole, because the whole point of parole, which we try to emphasize in trying to, quote, reform or transform the system, is to say it's about your ability to live outside of prison. It shouldn't be about the crime you committed, 80 years ago. Those things are important. So we have to have them in place before people get out. There was a dear comrade from California who also died. He wasn't in prison, but he supported political prisoners for years, Felix Schaefer, who before he died was trying to come up with a structure that would be part of the Jericho movement, which was about healthcare and living and expenses, exactly the kinds of things you were talking about, Dr. McIntosh. It's a huge problem for everyone getting out of prison. There's, Fareed used to say, fuck reentry. If they had let me out with just a loincloth, I would have slept on a park bench, anything to be out of prison. But you really need decent housing. And what we have found is that a lot of formerly incarcerated people are the people who go into the reentry field in order to help the other people who get out. RAP now has a New York organizer who got out of prison a year ago, not even a year ago, after 37 years in prison, who lives at the Fortune Castle and is organizing other people from there to be the voice of those reentry institutions, and also the voice of demanding that people be released. I mean, I do have to say one thing that we get all the time from people in New York State is they say, well, the elders should be released, but there's no place for them to go because of the housing crisis. So, and we have a public health person and expert in senior services who works with us, who always says, you know, these medical people, are they saying that it's okay with them that our prisons become our nursing homes? That because we can't create decent conditions for elders in the community and housing, that we should just, oh yeah, sure, fine, let them be in prison. And I think that's another, you know, it's sort of another, like you were saying, Dr. Alvarez, about the things we have to keep saying. I always quote her. Her name is Ruth Finkelstein, and she's a long-term advocate for elders, but also now for incarcerated elders. Been really important to our work. Those are some of the things that we have to keep saying. And finally, I know the Northeast Political Prisoner Coalition is one that has dues so that there's funding for people when they come home. I want to say something that's totally unrelated, but it just occurred to me because this is also the Interfaith weekend, is that there is a faith leader in New Jersey, Reverend Lukata Mjumbe, who was really important to the release of Sundiata Acoli. And one of the things he organized, just for people to think about, is, you know, there's this place on the New Jersey Turnpike that's very famous because it was the, quote, shootout between the New York State troopers and Zaid Shakur and Asada Shakur and Sundiata Acoli, which was, of course, an attack by the cops. Anyway, that's beside the point. It was like a flashpoint for the police organizing about why Sundiata shouldn't get out. And Reverend Lukata organized an interfaith, wasn't large, an interfaith prayer session at that point on the New Jersey Turnpike that was shocking to the public because it turned a place of hatred and racism and attack on incarcerated people, on Black Panther leaders, Black Liberation Army leaders, into a place of healing and looking forward to justice. So I just think there's so many like avenues that we have bust this thing open. Oh, I guess that's too aggressive, to build our movements. So just wanted to throw that in because he was a spiritual advisor to Sundiata for years in prison and was just really a very important part of the release campaign.
Laura, I'm going to seek your consultation.
Dr. Alvarez, and then
Yeah.
we're gonna have some final comments.
I really will seek your consultation on this because one of the exercises we're doing now within, you know, prisoner elder abuse concerns everyone piece is to say, if you were sitting at the table with the public health departments, with a multidisciplinary institutional relationship, what is the ask? Are we prepared to understand what the ask is? And one of the things that's emerging is we must begin with a frame that harms have been done. It's essential to understand that this is a deeply, deeply dehumanizing, oppressive system, which has compromised the monopoly on state violence that should be in service of public safety. It is so, there's so much evidence. Once we start with harms done, we begin and we have identified, I'm going back into our minutes, housing, transportation, food support, alternative healing, not just health, connection to departments of health, but alternative healing. This is what Mutulu Shakur's legacy was. He taught us, you come with love. Before he got his training with acupuncture, he did massage of the addicts who came in suffering. He said, you know, you massage them, love them, touch them, heal with them. And this is so important. I spoke with Dr. Kikuyu Patterson. We are incorporating that into the language as we prepare to engage these different officials. Now, in California, in San Francisco, locally, we're doing it through an arts grant where we're using the artistic expression of our elders in prison and out of prison. And we're going to now engage all of our officials to create a public health liberation safe space where we can speak about the trauma that occurs when to be trauma informed, when you deny, when you gaslight, when you minimize the depth of suffering that is occurring. And in this space, we're going to use their voices, their artistic expression to combine that with a report of elder abuse. But it's very essential that we allow the healing elements. And I spoke with Tony Ali and his son in the use of acupuncture within that tradition, as well as employment, which is creative employment, mental health support, art and healing, educational, technical training. We should be as visionary, as broad as we can, because we're starting from a perspective of harms done. And it begins a conversation that has to happen with our professional colleagues, the police and the correctional officers. There's going to have to be a transition of our resources. I have so much to say. I'm so grateful for this opportunity to share this.
Thank you. We're going to close that with closing remarks. I want to thank everyone for being here this evening and great words. And we recorded everything, so we're going to continue to move on with this. So, Dr. Mack, could you give us your closing remarks?
Okay. How long do you want my closing remarks to be?
You can hear me, right?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay.
I said, how long do you want my, please, you got to unmute yourself again, Brother Shep. How long do you want my closing remarks to be?
5 each would work.
5 minutes?
Yeah, 3 to 5.
Okay. You know, when you sent me the invitation, it said as a special speaker. So of course, I always usually do a presentation and I usually have slides. I'm going to, I can show a couple of slides, but I guess that the things I wanted to say is that what's happening to our political prisoners, the topic was torture. You know, what's happening to our political prisoners is directly related to what happened to our ancestors. Torture is what's necessary to keep a person enslaved. It's not, you can't enslave a person just with the threat of death because people will resist. So we have people from George Washington on. I have examples of the fact that they, you know, that there was a part of torture. Then there's the culture, the whole culture. We've heard that it's a rape culture, and but it's also a torture culture. And as an example, I have a list of, it's hundreds of movies in which prison rape, which is a stressor for anybody that's in there, whether you're raped or not, it's certainly going to be on your mind, you know, and it's become a joke. So prison rape as a source of comedy. I have slides to show you how many movies. I mean, I have 4 slides that have to have at least 30 movies each, and they represent about 1/4 of those that we have. So it's hundreds. It's just a common type thing that's supposed to be, even in this age of Me Too, that's supposed to be something that's funny. So, you know, the medical situation that we described, I think even here, when you heard Laura and other people, the level of cancer and these things is just, it's ridiculous. But the question is, what's the solution? Well, struggle is one part, but that struggle has to take place on more than one front. I think that the legal case for cruel, unusual punishment, which is that number 8? I think that's you know, Article 8 of the Constitution. That I think that really needs to be pursued on a class action level, because it's very apparent once you make a chart or once you lay things out. The only weak part of the case is the unusual part. And that's because it's been going on in so many contexts for so long, ever since our people were brought over here. So I guess those are my closing remarks. It has to be the demonstrations and publications and the policy process that Amos Wilson wrote about and that Dr. Alvarez is involved in, the policy changing process where those kinds of things but they have to be joined also, I think, with a legal strategy, because without a legal strategy that ties all of this stuff together, this is going to be a moot point in 10 years because our elders are all at that age where they will pass away in prison if something more immediate isn't done. I have slides to show you cases that were won on the basis of these constitutional challenges. And
just to let you know, we do plan on having a full conference on this subject, but we definitely want to put something in this conference tonight. But yes, medical is definitely what we want to look forward to. Dr. Alvarez?
Oh, one other thing, Brother Shep.
Go ahead.
Are you aware that Volpe is back in the state, was released early? That Justin Volpe, who did that to Abner Louima, was released 6 years early. They did a month or two of where he was under house arrest. Now he's just totally, on the 10th of January, he can run just buck wild. Schwartz, his accomplice, as you know, is on the city payroll, at least the last I heard, for 6 figures as a carpenter. Of his 15 years since, he served 5 before he was released. So these are just the abuse. Prison starts right from the second of arrest, on up, and the abuses of all prisoners, because I think the Panthers used to say all prisons were political prisoners. The people we're talking about generally are POWs, or prisoners of war.
Absolutely. Dr. Alvarez, can you close this out with your closing comment?
So the first thing I want to say is that we are at a critical juncture now as it relates to our strategic decisions with an understanding, as Jalil, the way I would put it is there right now there is one metric: freedom. So we don't have confusion, I mean, when I speak about an arts grant, this or that, at the end of the day, it must be in alignment that is demonstrating freedom. And we're going to have, and we are having, a very rich organic response that is taking advantage of every opportunity that exists on the ground. So here in California, when we work now, I mean, I just spoke yesterday with the lawyer who's a part of the nation's leading gerontologist, Bree Williams, who's doing an amends program as it relates to compassionate release. And Phil Ting is, we got the contact. We want to organize and meet with them so that when we talk about compassionate release, we're literally speaking about what does it mean to take these medical institutions where our elders are being held, and how do we concretely on a policy level examine from a medical community and the legal community and the correctional officer community coming together and saying, how do we create those resources and transfer them for their safe release? That's a strategy I want to explore here in California. In Pennsylvania, you see with the Pennsylvania Master Plan, I'm going to just enjoy an opportunity to consult with Laura about how we engage effectively from multidisciplinary, the professional class interest, and the complicity of multiple different disciplines in relation to the construction of mass incarceration. The silence and complicity is now so shifted. There's a new generation of providers and professionals that is just like, I'm humble. They're so wise. They're so knowledgeable. 30 years, I couldn't have had these conversations. This is like, to me, this is beautiful that we can have these conversations around what it means just to do our job from a place of just like, recognizing these beautiful people and being in relationship and honoring and loving them. I mean, Mumia is a loving spirit. He has a right. And this is what I say when we report to the state, literally, that he's one of the most surveilled human beings on earth. He has a right from his examination of his loving curiosity of the African diaspora to examine the thread of loving resistance from a spiritual experience that is and he writes in his writings of the spirit of our fathers, what it means to be in journey of connection with the ancestors as it relates to the impulse for freedom, to resist dehumanization. Now, as a medical consultant, I step back and it's like, you have to just honor that he has a right to say that, and he gets to say white supremacy. He gets to say imperialism, settled colonialism, and he gets to say revolution because he has a right to say that. Our capacity to come together across multiple professional disciplines and effectively create the policy structures to release them from a place of harms done is possible. And we must do that.
Thank you. Laura?
Yes, I totally agree. I do have to say, Ricardo, I'm so sorry to say this on this, but the one part of what you talk about that has totally not been true for us is any kind of alliance with the cops or the guards. Nothing. I mean, we have found that they're absolutely part, because I think one of the big lessons that we need to remember all the time is that prisons are not a separate institution. Policing is not a separate institution from the imperialist state. And one of the things I learned in Palestine on a trip that I was really honored to be on in 2016, I think, is that the way that they hold up their political prisoners, and let's be clear, Palestine, the rate of political incarceration in Palestine makes the United States look like nothing. I mean, you know, it's because it's an open war by the Israelis against a national liberation movement. And the way that the former political prisoners and the current ones are included and held up for honor in society is as part of the struggle for the liberation of Palestine. And one of the things that I've always had to disagree with some of my comrades in the abolitionist movement about is that very often they're talking about the abolition of prison as if it weren't part of a state apparatus of violence and oppression and settler colonialism. I wanted to thank Dr. McIntosh for bringing up the issue of rape. I don't know if people know that in the prison that Linda Evans and I, my co-defendant, and many of the Puerto Rican women political prisoners were in for many years in Dublin, California, has been the subject finally of a lawsuit because of the number of rapes by guards of incarcerated women there. And it's not just, you know, some people have heard me say that for me as a lesbian, one of the most, I don't even know what word to use, horrifying aspects of daily life in prison was being pat searched by men every time I moved from one part of the prison to another. The actual, it's sort of what you both were talking about the general conditions of prison and how they destroy health. The level of daily trauma that comes in by knowing the one time that I lost my temper and elbowed a guard, I got dragged to the hole. And then luckily, because the lieutenant was a Black woman, I got let out because she understood that this man was doing this to all the known lesbians on the compound. So and that just brings me to say, when we talk about the health situations in prison, we must listen to women, formerly incarcerated women. And that in general, in this whole struggle, I think that, and you've emphasized this, Dr. Alvarez, that the voices of currently incarcerated, I mean, when I listened to Brother Kwame Shakur last night, his opening speech, it reminded me that this is a revolutionary movement to end the prison system as part of the white-led imperialist state. And the voices of people that we may not know because they weren't from political movements, but they became politicized because they are contesting one of the most violent and frontal forms of imperialist state power. And so hearing the voices, and, you know, there's right now, I call it the academic prison industrial abolitionist complex. And there are great books, and don't get me wrong, and there are great people from the movement who are writing books. But when there are panels about Attica, there have to be the people who were part of that heroic rebellion who are still alive. There have to be the voices of people who are leading these movements from inside, with people who have not been in prison, because we know, you know, I'm not Black, but I have listened to and learned from Black revolutionaries my whole life. So we know we have to build a united movement, but we also have to centering the victims, centering the survivors, and making sure that people's voices are being heard and that we're listening to what they're saying. And I'm really, really honored to have been part of this. I really learned from this. I love working with all of you. Thank you so much for inviting me, Shep. And I just want to say something about Shep. Hardest working guy in the movement. I mean, when I was first working with you, Shep, you would be running out on Saturdays to bring food on 125th Street to feed people. You know, a lot of us talk about, oh, in the 60s and Breakfast for Children program, and we did all these things, and you're still doing it. And I just want to honor you. And I know how much work you put into this weekend and to all of this work. And I know there are a lot of other people. I'm not trying to say there's one, please live through that period. Don't want to ever do it again. There's one leader and no one else gets recognized, but you really do throw down for this. And so I love you.
Right on.
Thank you. I appreciate that. But that's what I do. It's what we do. Right. And I want to thank everyone for being here and looking forward to when we put together this medical conference. We're looking forward for you all helping out with getting that organized too. And that way Dr. Mack can do this slide. He does some great presentations to visual. So we're going to end this. We're going to bring him up to a poem. And end this by saying, what's the call?
Read them all.
Read them all.